Da-dum,
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 da-dum.
da-dum.
Diane, I got to ask you, it's been 50 years. Is it safe to go back in the water?
No.
It is not. All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Fellowship of Geeks. I'm Jim.
I'm Diane.
And today we're going to be talking about the 50th anniversary of Jaws.
I wore my Jaws shirt just for us today.
We went and
He
saw...
does say I'm going to need a bigger boat.
You are going to need a bigger boat, and you might need a bigger stream because we're going to be big and bold and talk about Jaws in IMAX for the 50th anniversary release, as well as the Jaws at 50 documentary that is now showing on Hulu that we watched this week. So going to be talking about those and talking about how and if Jaws has stood up over the last 50 years.
So be sure to like, subscribe, and comment down below. Let us know your views on Jaws and whether you think it stands up.
So Jaws at 50 in IMAX. I haven't seen Jaws on the big screen probably since I was little.
I'm going to say I've never seen it on the big screen. So speaking of, what do you remember about Jaws? As we go into that, what were you thinking about?
Well, so the first time I saw it, I was 4 when the movie came out in wide release, but I think I was 6 or 7 before I actually saw it in the theater, because you have to remember, 50 years ago, films, especially the all-time biggest film, which Jaws did become at the time, played for not just a few weeks and then it was on streaming or video or DVD. They played for months and months and months and were constantly re-released. And I saw it at a Dollar Theater, the old Village Cinema. And my mom wanted me to go see it because it literally was a cultural phenomenon at the time. It was the biggest movie box office wise ever made. But not only that,
your family has a lot of ties to it, actually.
Absolutely. The movie Amity Island was set on Martha's Vineyard. And my aunt and uncle and my cousins lived there for a long time. My uncle ran the Dairy Queen, which was the only fast food restaurant on the island, and it was right next door to the A&P, which is a supermarket of old. I don't know if A&Ps are still around, or if they've been bought out by Kroger or somebody.
Yeah.
But they were right next door, and they had a big parking lot. My uncle, he was the scoutmaster there. He did everything there was to do on Martha's Vineyard, and all my cousins are islanders. They were all born on the island.
Islanders, there's a good term.
Right, and my dad and his twin brother, my uncle, were born just outside Boston, and grew up on Cape Cod and grew up in the ocean and all that. But then when my uncle came back from World War II, he was a merchant marine. He moved out to the island, and they got a Dairy Queen franchise and ran the Dairy Queen there for decades. But you just seeing the different scenes and kind of watching. I've been to Martha's Vineyard a number of times with my family. And seeing like, oh, I rode on that ferry, and like you come across the bridge and it's like, yes, you come into Edgartown there, which is, they play as Amity Island, and the bike shop, which when the movie was filmed, was not owned by my cousin, but years later when I visited when I was 10, so it must have been 1980, 81, my cousin had bought and ran the bike shop on the island again for decades, and I mean they still may run it as far as I know. Someone in my family. I
didn't remember that story, but I do remember when we first got together and watched it. They get to the scene where they're throwing the roast in to try and catch the shark, and you're like, "That's my cousin." I was like,
right.
"What?"
Yeah, so that was an older cousin by marriage that were islanders, and the other really cool thing. And I think for people that didn't know, when you watch the documentary Jaws at 50, there were a few, Hollywood people on there, but almost everyone else that had, there were tons of extra shots. My aunt and uncle, there's several beach shots, and like we'd watch them be like, oh, we were down there somewhere, and I'm like, sure you were. Everybody on Martha's Vineyard was somewhere on those big beach shots, and we're down there, and my cousins were in their late teens at the time. And early 20s, but my aunt and uncle, they're like, oh yeah, we were sitting down there and we saw that, and but so many of the other characters in the movie besides the stars were islanders, were people from Martha's Vineyard they recruited, and it gave the film such heart and such local flavor, and they even kind of, early in the movie, when Mrs. Brody's making fun of Mr. Brody about, saying the yard, and she's like, no, we're islanders, you have to say yard.
I was just thinking that. I was like, that accent is hard to fake. Actors and actresses are very good and can figure it out. But for extras and for local townspeople to fake that accent is a real challenge.
Right.
So I see the benefit in using locals for so many of those roles. I agree. I know we'll get into the documentary later, but I was stunned listening to the documentary that really a handful of Hollywood people and everybody else already lived there.
Right. And I mean, the island practically, and its culture, and I mean, it's so different now. It's built up is the wrong word, but it's become such a playground for the rich and famous now. And then, I mean, it was a little bit then, but nowhere near what it is now. And I mean, just the culture and that local flavor is so lost and so comes through in the movie. And I mean, that's a piece of Americana that is just is lost, and just how cool that just kind of being immersed in that with the greater movie going around. I mean, the townspeople and, you know, all the people in there. One of my favorites is the guy that, the big heavyset guy in the camo, when Richard Dreyfuss arrives on the island, and says, "Hello, young fellow. Well, hello to yourself." Like, it's just like, he is so great. He was just a local.
Right.
And so many of them were. And I also, the other thing I liked about the documentary that I'd forgotten, the TV interviewer on the beach, that was Peter Benchley, who wrote the book. And I'd forgotten about that until we watched the documentary. I'm like, oh, that's right. He had that little kind of cameo role. And now you think of cameos, it's like somebody shows up in the background. These weren't, I mean, these people had speaking roles. I mean, they were getting paid at least scale.
Right.
So whatever that was back in 1974, 75.
It was. I probably saw the movie for the first time on television, and we didn't watch a lot of thrillers when I was a kid, so I may have easily been into my teen years before I first saw it, at which point Jaws 2 is already out, Jaws 3 and 3D is out. I remember it scared me. I didn't want to go in swimming pools, and then kind of clarified to myself, I was like, okay, it's an ocean shark. I can go in a swimming pool. It's going to be, I can see all the way to the bottom. It's going to be okay. I had the same reaction to Superman. I didn't want to cross bridges because the one collapses in Superman. But that thought that just there was a shark out there, and we once vacationed in Myrtle Beach, and I was still in the, listen, sharks live in the ocean. I'm not so sure I want to do this. And again, mid-20s, time had certainly gone by, and I had no interest in tempting that fate. And sure enough, if I didn't see a fin go by in one of the waves,
it's probably just a barracuda.
And then lost the fin in a wave, and I've never left the water so fast. And I was talking this week with my mother. We actually lived in Tallahassee at the time the movie was released, which is not on the beach. It's still a couple hours drive to the beach from Tallahassee. But she said there was a lake right by us. And she said that movie scared her so bad, she didn't get into her knees in the lake for years.
And see, my childhood experience was so different because my mom is a huge skeptic.
Okay,
and
I would say your mom would have like thrown you in the deep end just to show you there were no sharks there.
Well, and so when we're like, people are, I mean, and this was probably 2 years after the initial release of the movie, and again, we were seeing it in a dollar theater. It was a late matinee, early evening, as I recall. Again, I was 6 or 7, and I'm thinking, oh my gosh, this is a scary movie,
right?
And she's laughing and saying, oh, look how fake that shark looks. And you can see the reticulation in his hinged jaw. Oh, you've been there before. That, you know, like, and just, and so really took the edge off for me. And so I didn't come away from it scarred. I came away from it scarred thinking, man, my mom is really, jaded and twisted. And like none of this like even affected her, and she's laughing at it and making fun of it. People around us are screaming and jump scaring.
I would love to know if she really was distinguishing between the shots of live sharks and the shots of the mechanical shark, and how interesting that she could peg and see what later came out to be problems they were having with their mechanical shark. That's fascinating.
And they're probably, and again, she may have, talking to my aunt and uncle, may have known from some of, the people on the island that, oh, well, they didn't use the shark much because the damn thing never worked. And the miracles of the few times it worked, they got those shots, and to us, they're iconic. And thinking back about the art of filmmaking, and you see so many, and even just thinking of the more recent shark movies, seeing the Meg and things like that, how much they show it. And Spielberg certainly didn't plan it this way, but because the shark didn't work and they had to work around its working, and they had these really great characters they developed, and there was that mystery of the shark, and when the shark showed up, it was truly, terrifying and horrific. But that was an accident. That was not intentional to keep that from the audience.
Right.
That it was a just pure accident, and some of the other brilliance. And I was talking with a friend of mine on Facebook who's a big music guy, and he's like, the movie was great because of John Williams. I said, absolutely, that score and the way the music, and I mean, it's iconic. You hear that and you're like, oh, something's coming. And the way they played that up and has continued to be done, the music tells you when the shark's coming. Get ready.
Right.
And just such an iconic job. And then you look at the string of just the amazing things John Williams has done since then, and the movies he's been in that are woven into our childhood and woven into our culture.
But even as storytelling goes, like you said, that music changes, the shark's coming. We saw the Meg you just referenced. The Meg does the same thing. The shark's coming. The music changes.
Right.
Even though they do show it on screen more, the music changes before it shows up. It's coming. Right. That technique was so iconic in Jaws, but became a little bit of a staple of movie making. I had kind of the opposite reaction because I saw it a little bit later. I already knew about the New Jersey attacks from 1912, which were horrific. 5-6 boys, I think, that disappeared over a 2-week period. They had 10 shark attacks in this 2-week period of a rogue great white that was never caught, was only kind of seen.
And in earlier interviews, Peter Benchley said he, to some extent, based it on some of that experience as well.
And I look now, we're seeing so many more rogue and unusual 22 to 25 foot great white sharks. And so that difference in between, my mom teased, she's like, that scared me so bad I wouldn't go in the water, but I watch weeks worth of Sharks Week now. And so just that difference to we're fascinated by them, whether they be these giant predators or we're the invaders in their world, we're still fascinated by sharks and their reactions.
And I mean, they are a perfect evolutionary creation. They have not changed substantially for probably millions of years. They swim, they eat, and they make baby sharks. And I mean, they are just so perfect. And you look at fighter planes and how they're designed and what they look like. And I mean, it looks like a shark. And it's like, there's something to that. They are perfectly designed for what they do. And that's swim, eat, and make baby sharks.
I think the mayor has a really good point when he tells Brody too. You say barracuda, and people are like, oh, that sounds kind of bad. You say shark, and there is a visceral reaction to what that means and what that potential for destruction is.
And it is such a visceral, just burned into us. And I don't know if it's our culture or that's just coded in our DNA. Shark just gets your attention.
Right.
And I mean, this is 50 years since this movie came out, and there have been a zillion shark movies since then, and most of them have been utter garbage. I mean, I remember I saw a bunch of them, and if you thought some of the scenes in Jaws looked fakey, wait till you see some of these abominations. Some of the ones that came out in the early 80s were just garbage.
I had that same reaction. One of the other ones I love is Deep Blue Sea.
Mm-hmm.
I like that one a lot. And as I was watching this release and watching the shark take down the orca and the way it began to sink the orca, I was like, oh my gosh, Deep Blue Sea took this action in how their sharks go about trying to sink the platform. It's the same action that's happening on behalf of the shark. And as we, I've watched more what's going on with some orcas in the wild right now and those hunting patterns. There is an intelligence. They may be an absolute streamlined machine. The intelligence, though, to what they're doing, I think is underestimated.
Oh, absolutely. And I mean, we don't have a good way to measure it. Like, here, fill out this, questionnaire. Oh, sure, I'll get right on that.
We don't have a good way to measure it in humans, to be perfectly honest.
And there's the old, you give a monkey and a fish the same test. The monkey's a genius and the fish is an idiot.
Right.
Well, maybe not. Or, tell the fish to go climb the tree. The monkey's going to crush him every time. So, but and I think you're getting at some of the, when the movie came out, sharks were vilified because of that, and that was never Peter Benchley's intention, and it's those unintended consequences, and worked so hard in the preceding years to say they're just doing what they're doing, and it's a movie, maybe based on some things that did happen, but sharks aren't evil. Sharks just do what they do, and we're going where they are. And you joked about when we went to the beach in Florida or Myrtle Beach or wherever it was. The most dangerous thing we did that day was drive to the beach.
That's true.
Being in the water, like the chances of something, a bad outcome, we were much more likely to be, seriously injured or killed in the car wreck driving there than we were, going in the water and encountering a shark or a barracuda or, even a jellyfish.
I think that's very true, though. And, I think viewers and readers can more easily make a distinction. Clowns are not bad because Pennywise and Gacy dressed as clowns. Most people still view clowns as happy-go-lucky filler material.
You're the one that views them as filler. You don't like clowns.
But not because I think
bring
they're
on the
evil.
Elephants in the trapeze, right? You just think they're dumb.
Right. So it's interesting that we're able to make the distinction. I don't think they're dumb. I think they're filler to other things going on. We know some clowners, and I don't want to offend the clowns we know. I also just think that.
Come on, Diane. They're clowns after all.
They are clowns. But we can make that distinguish that they're clowns, and they're not embodiments of the evil we see in Gacy or the evil we see in Pennywise.
Right.
We can distinguish that Pennywise is a fictional character, but somehow the inability for people to have watched Jaws and really make that distinction surprises me. And I don't know if in the 70s so little was popularly known about sharks and if that led to kind of this view that they must be the way they're portrayed in movies, because we don't do that with everything else. We don't say, oh, they must be the way they're portrayed in movies.
And I think so much has been done to, rehabilitate the image of sharks in the last 50 years. And I mean, even when Discovery started doing Shark Week 25 years ago, there was a little bit of exploitation, and they came around to much more of a conservation viewpoint as Shark Week kind of progressed, and we learned more. And I think the other thing, the other point you made, we didn't know a ton about sharks, certainly in popular culture and people in general. You ask them about sharks, be like, and especially before Jaws, they're like, oh, they live in the ocean. Like people just didn't know much at all about sharks unless you were, in a biologic, oceanographic kind of type job, or were really, for some reason, you live by the ocean and were fascinated by them. And even he's going through the books and he's like, we don't know that much about, and that was so true then. And we've learned a ton in the last 50 years
And yet still don't know a whole lot.
We're still just scratching the surface and really starting to get a grasp on some things. There's so many different species of sharks.
Right.
And just, they're not all a great white. They're not all, and then, you got on the other end of the spectrum, you got nurse sharks and whale sharks. That are just about as, gentle and harmless as you can get. So, but yeah, that education continues, and we continue to learn about that natural world and see their place in the health of our oceans.
So we did get to go see it on the big screen again for the 50th anniversary.
And not just
released
a regular old big screen.
An IMAX
screen.
All right, so tell me what you felt in watching it was different in watching it on IMAX than it could have been in watching it not on IMAX.
So the thing that sticks out to me, and we're old theater people, and I'm definitely an old film guy.
We are, but I'm not sure I always distinguish
You're nowhere near as nerdy as I am when it comes to that.
Always.
The nice thing, and the thing I've not liked about movies that were shot in digital, and then almost everything in the theater we went to was shot in digital. I think our closest real film IMAX is in Indy, which a lot of people made the trip and went and saw Oppenheimer this summer. But it was shot. It was last summer. Was Oppenheimer? Sorry.
Doesn't Union Terminal have the
OmniMax? I think they've converted to digital as well.
Oh, okay.
And it was shot on actual film, and watching the filmmaking process and like some of the documentary, those were some honking reels. So it may have actually been shot in 70. Most of the more modern movies, most of the movies that were made in the later 70s into the 80s, when this movie's in IMAX. Most of those movies were not shot in IMAX, which is a 70 millimeter format. It's a 70 millimeter format turned sideways. It's shot in 35 and they just blow it up. So it's bigger and brighter, but it's not crisper.
I was gonna say you would get some distortion on the edges,
right? As they blow it up, and so I remember. I think the first movie I ever saw that was shot in digital, that was projected in digital, was Ocean's 11. And the depth of field when they had black backgrounds, and they had a couple of those big long scenes in Vegas where they had the hotel and some of the lights, and then it was dark all around it.
Okay.
It didn't feel right. Huh. It didn't look right. There was something about that depth of field that was very. It looked fake. And I think that was and it's gotten better since then, but I still think film is superior, and every now and then you see a director that comes out, and Christopher Nolan's a great example. When he shot Oppenheimer, they shot that in legit 70. And so this, looking at it, I didn't go back and look, but looking at the reels they had when they were doing the deal and putting the pieces together, I'm like, they shot that in 70. So they had an original print then that made it much easier to convert that to the IMAX format. And it was so well restored. It looked so clean. It was the bright scenes were bright. The dark scenes were bright. The detail was there. It looked so good. And just that really big screen, when you see the big shark or the little boat or whatever, it just feels bigger and really brings it home.
And I will say, as old theater people, films we've seen that are put together that have a sprocket that still shows, or have a scratch down a portion of it, sometimes that's bad handling, and sometimes that's just aged. And storing film for 50 years is challenging to do. And I was really struck that none of those things were in the film. There were no scratches. There were no just age marks to it. There was none of the splotches you can get from things that have been spilled on it. There were no, I thought it was amazing. Even the meteor shower that took place during one of the scenes, you can see two of the shooting stars coming in that are captured on film, and they looked so brilliant on screen this time. It was, in that manner to me, it was such a clean, well-restored film that didn't feel like there'd been an overlay of digitizing to it. It just felt clean and real and just well done.
And I mean, their master, they've obviously taken good care of the master and carefully restored it and converted it into IMAX. But it looked so good.
But
the presentation was great.
The idea of caring for and storing that film, we think nowadays on toy collectors. Everybody wants to save a toy in a package and don't open the packaging. This could be a collector's item. A lot of that came about because people had stored toys without knowing they were going to increase in the value and without knowing things were going to be nearly as popular as they were. We'll get into the documentary some and talking about a young Spielberg. There is no way he or the studio had originally known to keep such good care. Now, you said the film was super successful in those first couple of years, would have led to, let's try and take some care of this and store it well. But even then, the ideas of what good storage was in the 70s.
Yeah,
and how you keep film well over these next 50 years with the advances that were going on, I find somewhat impressive.
Well, I mean, I think, they, especially after that initial box office success when the movie got bigger and wider and wider. And again, you re-released big movies not at their anniversary. You might, they might go sit in the vault for a little while and you make your master and you might make some new prints, or there might be enough, decent prints floating around that you re-release it. I mean, that was what I saw in that, dollar discount cinema. And it was $1 at the time. I'm sure that was when dollar.
I do think this is another time that the loss of dollar cinemas comes back up. We've lost this discount cinema concept and the ability for them to fill in slow periods with re-releases of old films. And I'm sorry I cut you off.
No, you're fine. But I mean, I kind of doubt that theater was even had stereo sound. Not that I would have noticed when I was 6 or 7. But I mean, this was a couple years later. It was still packed. I don't remember it looking awful. There was probably a scratch. There was probably some dirt on it. Because by the time you've shown it that many times, even if you're doing a great job cleaning and caring for your projectors, and there was a lot more love of it back in the day. But yeah, it looked so good, and just was so bright and so crisp, and just everything about it looked good. And I really enjoyed seeing it in IMAX. And again, seeing it on the big screen. I mean, not just, bigger than your 100-inch screen like the Spielbergs have in their living room. Going and see it at a, real big movie theater was just an incredible experience. And they did a really good job in the IMAX.
I think the re-releases, as you were talking about, they would do every couple of years. As we came and bought tickets for this one, what I noticed is there are a lot more re-releases starting to come up. And I think Sixth Sense is getting a re-release. That's another great film that we've talked casually before about the ability of people to keep that secret all summer.
The cultural phenomenon of that.
The cultural phenomenon of it.
Just unheard of.
And so I'm kind of excited about some of these other, Back to the Future was advertised.
Is that like a 35th or
I think so.
Some anniversary like that?
But it's exciting to see some of these films get a second life on the screen again, even if they've been well known and in kind of the cultural lexicon for such a long time. It is a different experience to sit in a movie theater with a group and watch this film. I was surprised at 4 o'clock on a Friday maybe not 4 o'clock on a Friday holiday afternoon or Thursday. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Maybe not as surprising, but I was surprised as full as the theater was, and people stayed. It ended and nobody rushed out. We all knew there was no end credit scene.
Right. There's no surprise scene teasing the next one. Stay tuned, folks. We're going to give you clips from Jaws 2.
Marvel didn't add an end scene to this one. So we knew that wasn't coming, but people stayed, and you could hear people talking about it. And so many people talking about having seen the documentary.
Jaws at 50 on Hulu, yeah. And so speaking of that, what did you think of that? How did you enjoy that? What were your takeaways from that?
I really enjoyed that. I'm going to say things that sound kind of disparaging. I loved listening to Steven Spielberg talk about his film and the filmmaking. I had not realized how young he was and that this Jaws was his second or third movie
Big movie,
ever.
yeah.
And so just hearing that aspect and his perspective over the years of it, the access he allowed someone to have to interview him about it was amazing. I found him to be so real and genuine and humble about the success in a lot of ways. I don't always find George Lucas to be that way.
He does. George Lucas does have a pompous or kind of haughty feel to him.
And I think I can walk away and see some of the difference. Star Wars is a creation Lucas created.
Mm-hmm.
Spielberg didn't create some of those movies that he's
Right.
well known for. He took someone else's story and made it a movie and was very good at it. So there is that difference. And we've talked again in our private lives, the difference between writers and artists sometimes. And so I think that's part of the difference I see. But I was just really taken by how everyone talked about the film and talked about, honestly, what a good time they had filming that, even though conditions were not always optimal. I was absolutely taken aback when Spielberg talked about suffering some PTSD.
Nobody knew what that was.
Nobody knew what it was, and that's not what he
Right.
called it, but that's truly what
Right.
his description was, that he had taken folks out to Martha's Vineyard for what was supposed to be a 30 or 40 day filming, and they were there 80 some odd days. And the guilt he felt in keeping people away from their families across the country on this stupid mechanical that wasn't working, and resetting shots that took hours to reset it, and just the phenomena and grace it takes to do that at 27. But the guilt then he felt for years and decades about having kept people that long on the filming of a film that, again, no one else interviewed said anything about.
Yeah, they didn't complain.
With the caveat here, I found it interesting that Richard Dreyfuss didn't talk a lot there was an interview with him. Not much said about the film, and I didn't feel what he said was very... He didn't feel like he enjoyed the experience. I'm going to put it that way. He talked a lot about how he thought it was the worst decision he'd ever made and would have turned it down if he could go back now. And I was really taken aback.
Well, and I think his experience and the rivalry that he had, and he felt he was abused, hazed, bullied.
I'll go with hazed, probably.
And you
By
know,
Robert Shaw.
And I don't know that was Robert Shaw's intention. They were obviously different generations. And I think Robert Shaw said some very complimentary things years after about Richard Dreyfuss. I don't know that Richard Dreyfuss has taken those to heart, or believe that to be true. And I think Robert Shaw wanted the best out of him and maybe saw some of his potential genius and how good he could be. And I don't know if he saw any wonder in, but I mean, for me, he makes that movie.
He does. I could see a perspective from Robert Shaw, though, because you take Robert Shaw for who he was.
Right.
And really the headliner,
he was the star.
He was the star. Roy Schneider. I don't know. What else had he done before Jaws?
I mean, he was
some things.
He was a movie star, but he
was
wasn't
a movie
like,
star, but he's,
oh, we're going to pick you as our leading man to front our tentpole movie.
Right.
I mean, Hollywood didn't
He
think
was
that
not
way
that.
then. He certainly was not, and Richard Dreyfuss was not.
an up and comer. He was.
And if he hadn't done that movie though,
I don't think he'd have the career he has.
well, Spielberg wouldn't have turned around and put him in Close Encounters, which really brought him into the public sight and the zeitgeist. And from there on out, like everything, he did a lot of big movies, and he was a movie star after that. But if he wouldn't have been on Jaws, he wouldn't have been on Spielberg's radar to make Close Encounters when Spielberg, had the gravitas to be able to go do that now that he had the biggest movie of all time under his belt.
There is the juxtaposition. The three of them, Brody's wife and the mayor are the only other real Hollywood people brought in for this film. So I can see as well that all three of those stars probably had some view of, oh, we're now stuck here 80 days with a bunch of yokels. Right? I mean, they're not acting with other actors a whole lot. They're acting with a bunch of people who just live here, who've memorized one or two lines they're supposed to give. You talked about the interaction with the gentleman on the dock when Hooper arrives. The documentary says nobody scripted lines for him.
No,
Every take was
everything.
Absolutely different because he said something different every time you took it, which explains some of Hooper's reaction. Then he gets off the boat. He's like, "How are you, little man?" He's like, "Nice to see you too."
Who
knows what answer I'm getting today? So I can see they may not have taken to the type of filming as well as if they had filmed it on a Hollywood studio. I'll give them that grace.
And I think the other thing that came away from the documentary that just kind of made me chuckle, they interviewed James Cameron a couple times and had little hits with him. And again, he's a National Geographic guy. He went down with Titanic, and so National Geographic co-sponsored the making of this documentary. So they had a lot of folks from National Geographic.
With the Benchleys.
Right.
Okay, we'll get to that in a minute.
And it was so funny. He kind of teased Spielberg about warning him not to make movies on the water because, oh my gosh, what a nightmare it is. And there are some rather famous Hollywood flops that had ridiculous budget overruns because they were shot on, and Waterworld is the first one that springs to mind. They got hit by a typhoon. They had every problem you could imagine and a few more, and it was all shot on the water. The amount of work, I remember seeing I don't think it was full-on documentary, it was behind the scenes of The Abyss that James Cameron did. That was an experimental film that had a $180 million budget and big-time Hollywood stars in it, all in preparation for making the Terminator. It was an experimental movie to develop the metal technology for Terminator 2.
Isn't that amazing?
And I'm like, I wish somebody give me $180 million to go, make some, we're going to do an experimental movie. Now, I'm not going to tell you that.
This might work. Let me find a film that has a plot around that.
We're going to try it. And they had all sorts of problems. And they had some serious problems. They about killed a couple of the actors with drowning. And there were all kinds of problems.
Ed Harris talks about that.
Really, really traumatic. And that was, I cannot imagine how difficult a shoot it was.
Is that the one Ed Harris talks about, like, maybe not coming back? In the middle of filming, he's like, I might not come back again. We're good here. Thanks.
Well, there's
Peace
the scene
out.
where he's, bringing Mary Elizabeth Mastrantonio back to life after her drowning.
Right.
That pretty much happened to him. There were, triple redundancy failure there.
Right.
So just really hard stuff doing. And Cameron goes on to, make Avatar Way of the Water. Oh, Jesus, really?
Titanic.
And all these other ones that are on the water. And so certainly had some success on it, but it is fraught with, all sorts of problems. And whatever your budget is, you need to add, another 20 or 30% because the ocean and the water is unforgiving and it's going to do what it wants. And you can try all the special effects magic you want. There's just some things that aren't going to work out.
And I do think that's one of the things that was a learning lesson from Jaws and a cautionary tale to so many other movies that have come in the future from there. The documentary talked a lot about part of what caused the failures with the mechanical shark, which is well known as Bruce, which caused Bruce's failures, where they built it in fresh water and then took it out to the ocean and really had not considered the building of the shark. And were there 3 of them? I think they had 3 different ones they used for different pieces. Was groundbreaking in the effect that it was, and brought in a lot of older Hollywood folks who had the know-how to put together something of this massive a scale. But the consideration was not made what salt water was going to do to some of those mechanical pieces.
Water's unforgiving.
Instantaneously started rusting.
Salt water adds that corrosive nature to it, and everything's harder. And I think some of the amazing thing, and I don't know that we'll ever see this level of innovation again. I'm sure we will, but I don't know in our lifetimes we will. If you look at the leaps and bounds they made, I mean, they invented the technology to do the shark. They were making it up as they went. George Lucas was making it up as he went in Star Wars and with Industrial Light and Magic and all the things that didn't exist prior to that.
We saw this with Jurassic Park.
And again, that was the last time there was a big, we'd seen little bits and pieces of some, digital CGI stuff before, but until, the Diplodocus or Brachiosaurus walks out on the screen, you're like, that looks legit.
Right.
It's not like, oh, that's some claymation thing and like they're, shooting at a funny angle to get that. Like that looked really good. And I think that level of CGI was the last really big innovation. And you've seen it fine-tuned, and it continues in many ways to get better. Being able to shoot on digital has certainly refined that process and made it cheaper, if anything else. But I mean, Jurassic Park had a pretty hefty budget too. But again, whose name was attached to that? Steven Spielberg and Industrial Light and Magic, which didn't exist for Jaws, because if they did, that probably would have been, they probably would have hung it up and quit and said, screw it, we're done.
But it was innovative that Spielberg had the idea of how do we piece footage of real sharks in the ocean swimming around with the mechanical shark with a practical effect. He talked about how they did the effect of the girl at the beginning with ropes tied to her and pulling her back and forth. I was repeating that to my mom, and she made me stop. She's like, that is the scene. She's like, I have the hardest time getting past that scene. I don't even want to hear how it was faked. I was like, well, like, okay.
I don't think like that scene doesn't imprint on me, but the scene where they find her body and has the crabs. Oh, that one like gets me a little bit.
And
still.
See, for me, it's when Hooper, first when they bring her out in this small, tiny bucket.
Right. And he's like, really?
And then Hooper, they pull off the sheet and Hooper's like, nearly loses his lunch. He's like, there's no way y'all could thought this was something besides a shark attack. Yeah.
Yeah, no boat ran her over.
No. It is still just such a breathtaking film in reality. And then, to have it end in the way it did, right, and succeed in defeating the shark was such a triumph and something that carried on in the culture for so long. I think, the documentary references, or we referenced the other night, there's a Mythbusters on, can you really make a scuba tank explode if you shot it just right?
Yeah. And I'm pretty sure that one was pretty well busted.
Yes.
You knock the end off that, it's going to go through 6 or 7 layers of whatever's in between it and the layer that stops it. But to have that big catastrophic explosion.
Would it have shot out the back of the shark's head? Probably. Exploded? Maybe not.
Yeah,
I was more impressed this time because we'd watched the documentary first before we watched the film, as the boat is sinking there. And Brody is trying to line up his shot on the sinking arm. I was like, I'm curious how they got the boat to stay only partially sunk.
Well, I'm sure
it was impressive
to
me.
Hollywood magic, but there was air trapped up in the bow that kind of kept it up, and as it rolled and like kind of sat there, and you could see the shore. I don't know how deep that water was, but some of the waters around Martha's Vineyard, and they even talked about, they're going to end up taking their bottoms out on the rocks. There are some shoals in other places where it's not as deep until you get out really to true, blue water. But you could see the shore. as they were working back in. So I think that in the verisimilitude, plausibility kind of department, it's like, oh yeah, that that holds some water.
So thinking about sinking boats, the scene where he talks about the Indianapolis, I learned so much more from the documentary about that.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel bad I don't remember the name. Had come to Lucas and said, "Hey, I've done all this historical research." Spielberg, thank you.
That's all right.
Man, now I'm going to get everybody's names wrong. Okay. Had come to Spielberg and said,
The humble guy, not the pompous guy.
This research about a ship that nobody really knows anything about. Because I've grown up nearly my whole life with Jaws in the cultural lexicon, I didn't realize the story of the Indianapolis was still very unknown until the 70s.
Right.
And that this really brought that story of those heroes to the forefront and made it known to an American populace much more than it ever would have been known before. And talked about how, Robert Shaw took an 8-page script and he's like, no one's going to listen to me talk for 8 minutes straight. Right. Let me figure it out. I'll show up tomorrow morning. I'll show up tomorrow morning and just do the run. But that scene is so poignant, not just to the character development of Quint, and not just to the team building of the three of them, but such an homage to the men who risked their lives
and lost their lives
in that delivery of a turning point. I mean, it was such a turning point, but explains then so much else of what went on and what his view was.
And it turns him into, he's some bitter, psycho old shark killer who just hates sharks too. Oh, this is a vendetta. This will not be settled with him until he's dead.
Mm-hmm. It does take him kind of out of an Ahab type, great white whale type of search to, there really is more depth. There's a meaning to what he's doing and why he does it. Mm-hmm.
And was such a great character. And it was interesting because I learned years later, my dad was a World War II vet, and he was in the Pacific Theater. And he spent a lot of time on Guam, and I thought he spent the whole war on Guam. He was a Seabee, and then the other story he would tell, and he did not tell many stories, was they got back to Hawaii, and then from Hawaii to San Francisco, they were on the LST, landing ship tank, which they had no tanks on it. They were just shoulder to shoulder GIs and that was the quickest, best way they could get them at, 11 knots or something. I think was the best speed of one of these things.
I remember him telling that story. It was like, none of that sounds quick.
And he never gave exactly how long it took, but it was that's a long, slow boat ride from Hawaii to San Francisco. But we were talking, and we'd seen the movie. I think we'd watched it one time on VHS or whatever, and talked about it. And some friend of mine had asked about Anahuac, and I'm like, oh, it's right here in the Southern Pacific. And they're like, how do you know that? I'm like, I know all kinds of weird stuff. And my dad pipes up, and he's like, I was on Anahuac. And I'm like, hard stop. Anahuac, again, in the Pacific Ocean, which is really huge, is nowhere freaking near Guam, except for to say they're both in the Pacific. And I was like, what were you doing on Anahuac? Oh, we prepared the airfields for the bomb. I'm sorry, what? And I mean, he was a Seabee. He was an electrician. He was chief electrician. And so,
part of that generation that didn't talk about the war when they got home. Your dad was really part of that generation. Right. They didn't talk about a lot of stuff. So, and I know from the two of you, this was a real meaningful point for him to have this conversation with you.
And I'm like, whoa. Anahuac's even further away from Hawaii. And I'm like, there. And I mean, there's, again, he didn't talk about the war a lot. And he had his book of photos and stuff. And there were some ones, and I mean, there's one of him standing, and like, he's standing in what was left of a tropical rainforest kind of palm tree thing, and there was like a palm tree or two, and the rest of them were just all bombed out. And he's like, oh, we wiped out the island. He's like, the Navy bombed it to nothing, and we came in and finished clearing everything else out of the way. He goes, there wasn't too much left above ground, but he's standing there with a Tommy gun, no shirt on, pants rolled up.
I mean, to be honest, I've seen that photo. He looks straight out of casting call for the musical South Pacific.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. And I'm like, it's like, he's like, yeah, that was my favorite gun ever. And I'm like, oh, okay. Interesting thing to hear.
Cleared the landing field for the planes.
They were setting up the landing fields on Wetuck that the Indianapolis dropped off. Wow. And I'm like, oh, okay, a little piece of the puzzle that I had no idea about. So hearing that story and that connection, I'm like, I mean, my dad could have been on the Indianapolis.
Right.
Come and go, and who knows? Mm-hmm. And I'm sure his, going from Guam to Anahuac, I'm sure those were, really nice public orders too. That was not, any kind of secret mission. Why are you making the landing fields bigger or wider, or putting lights in, or whatever the hell they were doing, which, again, not much more of that story was shared. It was like, yeah, I've been there. No big deal. Whatever. I'm like, okay. Wow. So certainly, and my dad, much like Quint, again, he had some old salt and some of the sea in him. So just very interesting, and that I
he also can continue to talk about the yard and the car.
Oh, my dad always had that Massachusetts, kind of Boston suburb accent. Yeah, lucky I can even speak. So.
Which then, growing up in the Midwest, has created the most fascinating accent in you for a couple of words. But it was fun to listen to him a lot of times. And when I watch that film, I do hear some of your dad in that, which is a nice piece to have back as well.
So that was good. But certainly brings those
pieces of reality that are brought into a fictional film like that. They are the pieces that strike at the heart so much more, and they are the pieces that just bring a little bit more of the heartstring into a film. This was a thriller, and it's got its suspenseful moments, but it also has its comedy moments.
Oh, you have to, otherwise you adrenaline overload.
Absolutely. In a similar way, I mentioned the Benchleys were involved in the anniversary documentary, partially because they also wanted to go back. They've spent a considerable amount of time post-Jaws working with shark conservationists. And wanted to bring that a little more to the forefront. But Benchley's son said, he turned around one day and he's like, Dad's voice is on TV. What is happening? And Jaws had been playing in the background. And he has the privilege of having his dad memorialized in that way and saving that voice in every time it's replayed, that he gets to hear him as the interviewer in the show do that. So that's a really fascinating little family comeback around to it. But the Benchleys didn't just write the book. They were involved in writing the screenplay, which I thought was great. His family said, writing a screenplay is real different than writing a novel.
Absolutely.
And that was a very different experience. But they had worked with the Australian couple. Benchley had worked with the Australian couple who did... in the late 60s, early 70s, were doing cage diving with great white sharks off Australia that was almost unheard of at the time. And so...
Cage goes in the water, man goes in the water, sharks in the water.
Exactly.
I was like, okay.
And so used them to get to know shark behavior for writing his novel, but then put Spielberg in touch with them, and Spielberg used them for the footage of the shark that's used.
And the Benchleys were divers. I mean, they were scuba divers. His wife talked about, we swam with sharks then. And again, That wasn't like, hey, we're going to go put, like, they were out in the wilds doing it when there was just nowhere near the technology, the knowledge, any of the things that we have today.
Right.
And I mean, even though there haven't been huge innovations in scuba in 50 years, there have been enough little ones. I mean, it's still a dangerous thing to do, but I can't imagine doing it 50, 60 years ago. I'm like, okay, sure.
I think it says a lot about, we've talked about some of the other actors in it, but it says a lot about, while Spielberg felt bad and had some hesitations with the filming, those actors continued coming back. They did Jaws 2.
Mm-hmm.
They did Jaws 3. They did Jaws 4.
For the revenge.
I think Roy
Scheider was not in
Schreider
3
was
or 4,
not
but his
in 3 or 4.
The actress that played his wife was the only one that was in
Is
the
it
revenge.
Lorraine Gray?
Lorraine something, yeah. Her name escapes me.
I'm sorry.
Don't whisper; they can't hear you.
Okay, I'm sorry. But again, I think it says a lot that even the island invited them back to film too,
Right.
and so yeah, there's
And
a lot that
2
carries
was,
on forward.
As sequels go, 2 was a good sequel.
Mm-hmm.
3, I remember 3 vividly. I saw that in the theater in 3D. It was my brother's
It was one of the first films in 3D, wasn't
no,
it?
they'd had films in
Okay.
3D forever.
It's the first one I remember.
But the 3D craze had kind of died out, and that was one of the ones that was trying to bring it back. Because there had not, I mean, I remember when I was much younger, you heard about 3D and you saw the glasses, but I mean, 3D had been around since the 50s and 60s.
Okay.
Since they had color film and were able to do it. But that was one of the first ones that was like a big movie, and it was in wide release. And we were supposed to go to Chuck E. Cheese's for my brother's 10th birthday, but a couple weeks before, his best friend had broken his collarbone, and playing video games was just not in the doctor's order, so instead we pivoted and went and saw Jaws in 3D. Which I was okay with. I loved going to the theater, and I'm like, a 3D movie in the theater? Let's go. I think the only thing I'd ever seen in 3D before that was The Monster from the Black Lagoon. One of the local stations had rebroadcast it, and you could go to
the convenience store
and get your 3D glasses.
That's awesome.
And I was like, oh, there's a reason I've never seen this movie before, because it's awful and boring in the 3D. I'm like, okay, but one of the things I vividly remember about it was there was a preview, and I think the movie was called Blazing Arrows, and it was a 3D preview.
Okay.
So it was like, oh, put your glasses on now, everybody ready? Here we go. And it looked like, again, as I recall from 40 some odd years ago, it was kind of it wasn't as good and wonderful as Blazing Saddles, but it was kind of a farcical Western.
Okay.
And literally the arrows are flying out, and the blazing arrows are flying out of the screen at you. You're like, holy cow. I'm like, I wanted to go see that movie just because that premise was cool. My mother was not so much on board for that. I don't know why. I'm like, I've never seen or heard of that movie since then, but I'm like, a preview in 3D? Mind blowing. But then, yeah, seeing it in 3D, and it was, again, it was a great movie when you're 10. That one does not hold up. I've seen it since then, sadly not in 3D. Jaws 3 is just...
I think Jaws 3 holds up better than Jaws 4.
Oh, gosh. Jaws 4, like, I've never watched it all the way through. It's so bad.
The shark is now tracking the family down to the Caribbean.
Well, and I mean, in 3, even, it's kind of ridiculous because they're on the West Coast.
That's true.
They're in, like, San Diego or something, or L.A. It was, I mean, the premise had run its course by then, and it's like, oh, it's after the families, because I think they had, I think Brody was dead or
I think
retired
so.
or something, I forget, but it was the kids that he was hunting now.
Yeah, one of them works at it,
Yeah, he was the director of,
and to look
Underworld, SeaWorld.
at what effect this had on the family, right? One of them now works in the industry
Right.
to work with sharks, and one of them won't ever get in the water again.
So, yeah, that one certainly did not hold up. And then 4, like I said, 4 was so bad, I've never seen it all the way through. I've seen bits and pieces of it, and I'm like, I just can't.
Not even with James Caan.
It's Michael Caine, I
Michael
think.
Caine,
Yeah,
there
Michael
we go.
Caine's in it.
It is
Yeah,
Michael Caine.
I just
I am
can't.
all about the bad names today.
I just can't. Never seen that one all the way through. So enjoyed seeing Jaws at 50 in IMAX on the big screen. I'm glad you got to see it on the big screen. There is, you're right, there is something special about seeing a movie in a theater with a group of people. We've seen enough where it's, four of us in a theater, midnight or whatever, doing technical screenings. It's not quite the same experience, but certainly Jaws is, was, you could even say it was the first event movie. They didn't know it at the time when they released it. They were like, oh gosh, I hope we, can get another job after this.
Which really was their thoughts.
Right. There. I mean, that was clear in the documentary. Like, we may never work again. I'm glad I got, paid scale for this one. And those gross points,
highly recommend the documentary. I really recommend people watch it. It wasn't very long. It was really well done. The access to the people involved in it was incredible. And I hope as there are more of these re-releases with anniversaries that someone would look at doing more of these documentary as well. And we referenced Jurassic Park. Right. That's in that series, Movies That Made Us, which again is really good. They're great interviews and episodes with folks who were involved. I learned so much about Die Hard, which is another film that we love that they literally wrote as they were filming it, which is just bizarre to me. Astounding.
that they captured such lightning in a bottle.
Right.
Making it up as they went. And I think there is a lot of truth in that for a lot of movies. It's like we have this really good idea and we have the right people and we're never going to get it just right. We just got to start going and we'll figure it out as we go along. And again, if you have the right people and the right idea, it's going to work out. And I think we see the failure to do that anymore because Hollywood has become... Would they make Jaws today?
I was going to say the opposite. I understand why studios have such a hard time deciding what looks like it'll be a good movie and what doesn't. Because you either need a really good script like Jaws, or you're going to get folks who do it on the fly as they're going along. And both of these films, Die Hard and Jaws, became absolute phenomenons. But they're from such very different ends of the spectrum on how they came about. How does a studio decide what the right course and best next step to authorize a film is?
I think they don't anymore, because if it's not a sure thing, they're so. I mean, I don't think Jaws. If Steven Spielberg had just had the success of Sugarland Express, came to Universal and said, "Hey, I want to make this," and Peter Benchley's book was very popular. It was it was a bestseller. Hey, we're going to make this into a feature film. I don't think they would have greenlit that. They might be like, "Well, here's a little money, go develop it," and go away, because we're never going to get back to doing that.
And the documentary makes a really good story on how that came about. That script and idea had been laying on somebody's desk for a while. Spielberg's waiting for a different meeting and starts flipping through it and continues to call the studio and said, "But this is the one I want to do next."
Right.
And there is that feel of, I don't think the studio was going to make it. And I don't think they were going to make that film.
No, and so many times, and I think we even know people this happened to, like, they want to go buy the script or buy the rights to it or whatever.
Right.
Because they don't want somebody else to make it, but they don't have any idea how to make it or be successful. So they're going to invest money not to have competition, and then they're going to throw it in the slack pile, and it's just going to waste away there in development. And to them, we're going to, pay the extra $25,000 again this year to, keep it locked up for the next couple of years. And we'll just sit on it so long that whatever heat it had, even though we don't know what to do with it, we'll go away and then be like, yeah, we're not going to renew our license. We changed our mind, whatever. And by then, all that momentum, which you had just a little bit, oh my gosh, the studio, bought the rights to maybe make our idea or, bought our script. has just faded away, and times have changed and moved on, or somebody's made something that was kind of like it and it was a flop. But I think Hollywood is just so risk averse that you just don't see, a movie like Jaws. I don't know that you would have seen a movie like Close Encounters. We barely saw Star Wars. I mean, Lucas mortgaged himself to the eyeballs, begged, borrowed, and stealed, and went 18 different directions to get, to greenlight, to move forward with the next step. Not like, oh yeah, here's a budget. I mean, even a tiny little budget, and what they made Star Wars for at the end of the day was a tiny little budget. And you look at the return on investment of that, and even Jaws had a tiny budget. And now it's like, oh, well, I want to make this $200 million movie. And the studio exec bean counter says, well, that means we're going to have to make at least $400 million at the box office.
So I
to call
disagree.
it a break even.
I think you would get Jaws made again today. And I'm going to do a chicken and the egg thing, because there are so many other shark movies that are out there that did get made. Now, did they get made because Jaws was a phenomenal success? So would you make... Anyway, I'm not going to get caught in that circle for a second. I think you would get Jaws made again. However, I think it would have played up a part I didn't know was in the book. I've not read the book, where apparently Hooper and Brody's wife have this massive affair, which I didn't even know existed. Crazy. I think would absolutely be played up in a movie if you redid it today.
Oh yeah, because you got sex sells and you got to have sex anymore, and I mean, if there's not a love interest.
And I think it would be filmed as much more of a horror movie than a thriller. Mm-hmm. I do not enjoy horror movies.
I watch the news. I don't need to watch horror movies.
I don't enjoy that type of hack and slash but I do enjoy a thriller where there's just actually, I only enjoy some thrillers. I like a suspense, and I like this as a suspense film. Right. I don't think it would be made as a suspense film. I think it would be made as a horror film, and I think we see some of those out there. 47 Meters Down and some of the other shark attack films that are out there in that way that are not thrillers or suspenseful. They are horror films. And so I think that's how you would see this done. And I think you would see that affair really played up.
And that would be, a driving subplot as opposed to like, oh, something happened and they threw away. And I think, again, the movie works because that didn't happen.
And I appreciate that it read kind of a 70s mass market, that's not what they wanted to see. So
absolutely. So yeah.
What about you? Do you think they'd make it today?
No. They would, because it was, again, a bestseller, and a bestseller in the 70s and a bestseller now are completely different animals. I mean, you look at, what sells and what the numbers are and what it takes to be a bestseller. They'd be like, oh, sure, we'll buy the rights to that, and probably spend what I would think is a ridiculous amount of money to lock the rights up for it, and might even go and pay somebody a little money to write me a treatment of that. And probably is like, somebody we want to test out because we know what we want them to do. Let's see if they can write a screenplay for this crap that we don't want to make. Or it's going to be too expensive or we don't think it's going to work. And then it's just going to sit there at best in development hell. Maybe have a little pre-production. There might be, a director or some, producer attached to it, but nobody you'd ever heard of. And it would wither and die on the vine because they're like, nobody read this book, even though it was a bestseller. And are those people all going to go to the movies? No, half of them are going to be pissed off because it doesn't read like the book did. And there's no way we can make this book into a movie that people would go see. Right. They're so risk averse. And like it doesn't have any superheroes, or the shark doesn't like come out of a time portal or something.
It certainly would not be cast with the people who live on Martha's Vineyard. It would all be pretty people in tiny bikinis and
and would be kind of ridiculous. And I think what I love about Jaws is so different in the Meg and the Meg sequel. They're such different movies and have such a different point of view. And that works, and they had lots of pretty people and lots of bikinis and lots of exotic locales. And again, for what Martha's Vineyard is in 2025 and what it was in 1975, worlds apart.
That's true too.
I mean, worlds apart. Yeah, there were some people that had some money, and there were some rich. I doubt they were. They're certainly not famous in what we would think is rich and famous. And the rich and famous people are like, I'm going to go spend a couple weeks on, the vineyard and whatnot, and get my little black, lab sticker or whatever, and all that nonsense. It's so different than it was. And it's an exotic locale now. Mm-hmm. And I don't think it would be made. Certainly wouldn't be made with the people. Wouldn't have that slice of Americana that is certainly gone. There just aren't places like that as much anymore, and you don't see them you don't see them as a centerpiece of a big movie. And again, I don't think Universal thought, this is our tentpole movie for this year. It was a summer release, and I think they had some level of expectation of it, especially after they spent all that time and what was a good money. And I think one of the other great things in the documentary is Spielberg, when he was over on time and was still hoping they would continue to write checks, he figured he was going to get fired and shut down. And they were just going to take what they had and throw it in the vault, and it would never see the light of day.
And thought at best this would be the last film he made.
Right. And thought, his next movie was going to be shot on Super 8 and, in somebody's garage in Burbank if he was lucky. And so then again, to turn around and be the all-time at the time biggest box seller. And if you look adjusted for, if you look at attendance, I think it's still in the top 10.
Wow.
Just so many people. And it was in the theater for so long.
And so many of its phrases are now just incorporated in the American lexicon. We're going to need a bigger boat.
Yep. And so I remember when I worked at Blockbuster back in the day, they had some pins just promoting old movies. That was one of the 10 movies quotes they had. You had a little button that you wore on your, your little lanyard or whatever on your name tag. And I'm like, I'd trade my eye teeth for one of those.
Right.
But that was it. And even then, that was, a good 20, it was still, and I think it still is today. And the joke holds, the soundtrack holds, the way we make movies with soundtracks and some of that orchestral soundtrack, some of that is dead. They just, throw some old music in there. And
even though you just pointed out that that's not what Martha's Vineyard is anymore, the slice of Americana to a large extent still holds. And I think still rings true
people
with
still long
lot
and yearn
of,
for that, even if they never experienced it. And aren't, old like us.
Right. You talk about a white picket fence around your yard, you still think of Amityville Island.
The kids from the karate school are out karate in the white picket fences. What are you going to do about that, Chief? I got this giant rogue shark eating our, summer.
Well, in the same way, when I watched it, we've been rewatching Stranger Things at home. And the secretary who comes in to talk to Hopper about the pumpkin patch, right? And he's just settling in the middle of something else, and she's like, by the way, so-and-so called about his pumpkin patch
me 50
again.
times, and old Fred out in the country called about his pumpkin patch. It was
the same, she looks the same.
Right.
She talked the same. It was the same type of complaint being made. I was like, oh my gosh, who knew this was a quintessential small city, small town police secretary?
Yeah,
I didn't even know.
Yep. So, I think that's why those things are so popular, because even people that never experienced that or anything like that still yearn for that.
Right.
And that simplicity. So, yeah, Jaws at 50. It's still not safe to go in the water, even though it is safe to go in the water.
I would give it my Siskel and Ebert 2 thumbs way up.
Enthusiastic, and if you get the opportunity, go see it in IMAX. Even if it's digital IMAX, if you're near where they have real film, I'm so jealous. Go watch it. Go see everything you can in real film IMAX.
Definitely watch the special.
And definitely check out Jaws at 50 on Hulu. Really good, worth your time if you have any interest in sharks or the movie making process, or especially Jaws. Time well spent. You'll enjoy it. Just some of the behind the scenes, all the access to Spielberg, the Benchley family, little insider bits, some of the people from the island that that was
Robert Shaw's son is in it, and I just thought of something else. Robert Shaw's son is in it. He has a parody play he's taking
yes.
across that's
Yep.
that's based in the scene where they're all sitting in the orca comparing scars.
Showing their scars.
We talked about other actors, and sorry, I got so sidetracked. We talked about other actors that were in the film, and someone who was actually a professional actor that came back and played the police officer to Brody's police officer was actually from Martha's Vineyard.
Right.
Like the documentary talks about, like, he called in. He's like, I would love to play this role.
Right.
I'm actually from there.
These are your people. Go talk to
These
them.
are literally his
Literally
people.
your people. Yeah. So yeah, it still holds up. It is a classic film. Certainly,
So many
certainly
fun
just-
tidbits like that in it too.
and great lines, great quotes. I mean, I want to watch Robert Shaw talk for 8 minutes again. Like I want more. Left us wanting more. I think that's why the sequel was so successful, even though it didn't have that same magic of the first one. Is like, oh yeah, it isn't safe to go back in the water. So, for Fellowship of Geeks, I'm Jim,
I'm Diane.
and remember, kids, stay safe. Jaws is still out there.
Dun-dum.
Da-dum.